We've begun. Right. So we'll start with B. This you might remember this is one we did in the lab. So now I've got to use the lab time, other than for presentations, just to finish up all this material from lecture. You remember we did all these things with the dead space and those kinds of things. And so, I mean, I would review the distinction between what the spirometry does, obstructive versus restrictive diseases. Obstructive are blockages, and that's that FEV1. Restrictive are basically a lack of or a loss of functional young lung space. And so, and again, emphysema probably overlaps both of those. So you can, I mean, it's just a way of categorizing these. Remember, we did all this, the FEV1 and the forced vital capacity. And really, this is kind of the stuff we looked at what normal is and how much it can increase. Okay, modern methods are continually remarkably improving our ability to do this. And you remember we looked at this the last part before I did we did the demonstration with the technology was using this, pointing out that because of that dead space in a typical tidal volume, really is the emphasis when someone is having difficulty or is overly excited. I mean, that long, deep breaths is really a critical piece to make sure that they can restore it. Because that rapid, shallow breathing, this is not enough. Because inevitably with rapid, shallow breathing, that heart rate is going bang, 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 bang real fast. So it's really a problem. And so now we get to really the process of external and internal respiration. And it has a lot to do with what I like to refer to as Buxton stuff, physics and properties of gases and, sort of like the chemistry and physics kind of a thing, which is not stuff that I enjoy talking about. But certain things are important. I'm not going to ask you the name about Dalton's law, but partial pressures are effectively concentration. Well, that's what that means from a chemistry perspective. Measures of concentration, whether they're moles or not, partial pressure can function the same way. And so that's what Dalton's law is. Pressure exerted by each gas in the mixture is directly proportional to its percentage in the mixture. So we use the two as equivalent for how gases will move, and the usual stuff that's there, obviously. So nitrogen makes up not quite, but nearly 80%. Okay, so we look at the partial pressure of nitrogen and the relationship to oxygen, which is a skosh more than 20%, and we get to that typical 80-20 with a variety of other gases that are there as well. So as you can see, some carbon dioxide, water vapor, and different things. And of course, this dovetails into the altitude aspect of it. Okay, partial pressure increases or partial pressure decreases. So you have, and there's distinctive problems with this. The one that we were confronted by much more commonly is altitude and the adjustment that we have to make to altitude and altitude sickness. And it happened to me. So I mean, it's not something it can happen to anybody. We flew in, maybe I told you about it. We flew in, that was July of 20. So it was right in the middle of the lockdown type of thing. And my stepdaughter and her significant other lived effectively in Denver. And I mean, getting there was fine and everything. We had dinner the first night, and I wake up in a motel room the next morning, and it's like I had the headache of all headaches. It just came out of nowhere, and bang, it was there. An entire day, a travel day. Not only were we going from Denver, and where were we at Snowshoe? So we're staying at Snowshoe in the summer, okay, because we had timeshare points to use up. And there was a chance to visit them. We hadn't seen them in a while. Yeah, it was 24 to 36 hours of unbelievable headache. We went, because when you take that drive, you're going up to elevation of about 11,000. Snowshoe's about 8,000, so it didn't relent at all. And my wife was unaffected by it, but some people are greatly affected when they make that sudden change. Like again, taking an air flight and getting there. So it's part of it. Okay, and so and they talk about the different percentages that are there, and I don't make a whole lot out of that necessarily. It's that important. What happens at lower when it happens when you're at a different atmospheric pressure, the partial pressures increase significantly, and this is the problem. Did anybody here dive? Anybody here a scuba diver? Have you heard of a thing called the bends? Effectively, the nitrogen is the culprit. As the partial pressures increase in your bloodstream, I mean, it's a gas in your bloodstream. There's teeny tiny bubbles of oxygen, there's teeny tiny bubbles of carbon dioxide, and there's teeny tiny bubbles of nitrogen. What happens is, as pressures increase, we push more nitrogen in. That's fine, not a big deal. The problem is if you come up too rapidly, and since there's a much larger volume of nitrogen as compared to the other gases, those nitrogen bubbles can come out more rapidly, and since they're larger, they can obstruct blood flow to critical areas. That's what they call the bends, because as it obstructed blood flow into the internal organs, you doubled over in pain. That's where the expression comes from. So professional divers and experienced divers know about making decompression stops, so they don't come up more rapidly. If they have to come up really rapidly, hopefully there's another set of tanks they can grab and go back down. If they do have to come up too rapidly, then they have to get themselves, hopefully they're in proximity to some place where they can put them into a decompressor chamber, effectively a closed chamber, where they can increase the pressure, push the nitrogen gas back into the bloodstream, and gradually release it over a significant number of hours. So that's where the origin of that. So and that's potentially deadly, by the way. That's good. It's very significant. So yeah, I'm not a diver. Never really was. My first wife was a certified scuba diver, so she knew all about that stuff. So here's with gases and liquids. It's probably each gas dissolves in the liquid. That's what I was just talking about. Amount of gas dissolved depends on its solubility. Carbon dioxide is 20 times more soluble in water than oxygen, and little of the nitrogen, other than when you're at big pressures, will dissolve. Temperature, as temperature of liquid rises, solubility decreases. Okay. So these are, and so this is where I'm driving at with hyperbaric chambers. Okay. And so we use them not only for the bends, but we use hyperbaric chambers for oxygen. They've been used for a very long time on burn patients. They've been used for a very long time on patients with gangrene. You're trying to force oxygen in to the area, and what you're doing it for, with regard to burn patients, is to deal particularly with carbon monoxide, or people have just had. And there was that sad case with the baseball player's son. He was on vacation and wherever, and they finally established it was carbon monoxide poisoning. It's tragic. If you realize the potential of carbon monoxide, the whole idea of using that hyperbaric chamber is to increase the oxygen, to maximally oxygenate the red cells. And remember, your red cells have a lifespan. So every day that person is alive, they have a better chance of surviving, because the red cells are continually being made, and the ones that theoretically have been impacted by the carbon monoxide are being destroyed. So I mean, that's kind of the idea behind it. I've seen that people try to use it a lot for treating gangrene and for treating diabetics with incipient gangrene. Their gangrene was not infectious but circulatory, so trying to improve the overall oxygen saturation going into the extremities. And there aren't a lot of facilities. This one fellow was working at the VA hospital in San Antonio and was doing some research with it, and they made those facilities available, so you could even refer patients down there, things like that. So it's interesting. So oxygen at double 1 atmosphere, double the pressure. However, oxygen toxicity develops rapidly. So, and this is because of a large amount of free radicals. So it has to be done very scientifically with the amount of exposure and the time of the exposure and adequate time to deal with the free radicals that were there. And so all of this is pretty straightforward. Alveoli contain more CO2 and water vapor than atmospheric air, okay? As you can see, the oxygen diffuses out, carbon dioxide diffuses into the lung. That's the way the diffusion pattern is, okay? So the alveolar gas, you have a mixture of gases that was there, and that really creates a combination. Thank you so much. Thank you. So here we go. Now we look at the different types. This is at the lung level. This is external respiration. So oxygen and carbon dioxide. We look at the partial pressure gradients. They're the solubilities. This is interesting. Thickness is part of it. Surface area is part of it. It's interesting, and this is something you hear a lot about. It's a really important concept. Ventilation, perfusion, coupling. So what that means, we're going to match the availability, the blood that's coming in that needs to be reoxygenated or perfused with where the air is most readily available. It's great when, oh my God, I've had a terrible chest cold. Oh my goodness, I had a touch of pneumonia. And this is part of these wonderful backup systems that unfortunately as people develop chronic lung disease, long-term smokers, long-term exposure to environmental pollutants, et cetera, all of those things, toxins, which gives you a false sense of security. I've just made that point to the previous class, my A&P class, because we're kind of doing the same units you're doing, just in a little bit less detail than we do here. That's important. And the interesting thing that surprises people is that it's the gradients. Oxygen has a fairly substantial concentration gradient difference that drives it into the bloodstream. Carbon dioxide does not. Carbon dioxide has a relatively small concentration gradient. Why they diffuse equally, carbon dioxide is much more soluble in the membrane. It gets across the membrane more efficiently. So it doesn't require the larger concentration gradient. So solubility plays a big role. That's what they're talking about, the gradients and particularly the solubilities. That's sort of the special sauce when it comes to carbon dioxide. Why it can cause some problems as well. So they're looking at these, the venous blood, the alveolar, things that drive it. Equilibrium is reached in a quarter of a second. The red blood cell takes 3 times that long to traverse that pathway. So as a backup system, we don't even have to worry about. As long as your capillaries are intact, the alveoli are intact, you have a 3-to-1 ratio. Hey, I'm feeling a little slow today. Don't worry, got plenty of time to oxygenate. We're filled with those systems. I mean, you're listening or hearing. There's someone who's making sounds who is very fortunate to be here. That's me. I mean, the numbers are staggering. But I mean, these are what assisted me in not having, for whatever, thank you. I must have been nice to, I've helped a little old lady across the street. I don't know. Yeah, it was supposed to torture you. And I like to think I'm doing a very good job with that. Okay, moving on. So, but you have this wonderful backup capability where even if anything slows it down, you have ample time. And so now you can look at the CO2 difference and look at the oxygen difference that's there. This is, and they've got that number wrong, by the way, in the PowerPoint. You'll see they should have that clarified. But it's not 40 to 40, or we wouldn't be moving at all, obviously. There's only a 5 millimeter of mercury difference. CO2 still diffuses equal amounts. Carbon dioxide is 20 times more soluble in plasma and alveolar fluid than oxygen. I think the numbers are, it's like 100 and, here it is, the PO2 is about 100, okay, versus 40. Okay, so you have a difference of 60 millimeters of mercury, where on the CO2 side, 5 millimeters. So the solubility effectively neutralizes that number. And they're just showing it to you. So it takes very, very little time for it to reach that. And that is a safeguard. So we have lots of those neat little safeguards. Respiratory membranes are thin. They have a large amount of surface area. It's inside that lung. Imagine 40 times the surface area of all of your skin. All those, you're adding up all those alveoli, all those ball-like structures, those simple squamous cells, they all contribute. So there's a tremendous amount that's available. It increases dramatically if the lungs become waterlogged and edematous. So effective thickness, and this is the problem. I mean, it may be a minor problem if you're in college, it's pretty common, you get walking pneumonia. Okay, there's going to be X amount of fluid that's in there. It's a matter of degree. But the leading cause of infectious disease death in the United States of America is pneumonia. Pneumonia, leading cause of death here in these old US of A, of infectious disease deaths. I'm not talking about heart disease and cancer and all that. Infectious disease deaths. Pneumonia. That way I remember how to spell it. Right? I do that all the time. Wahole, W-hole for whole, as opposed to just regular hole. A xylophone. I'm a good speller. Just wait, maybe it'll be like you. I get closer. Dad, how do you spell? Look that thing up. So that 3/4 of a second in transit may or not be enough, depending on if it's quote unquote waterlogged. I think of it this way, that are there. So unfortunately, diseases, emphysema is number one on the hit parade, because all those alveoli, they go from being individual sacs and form, think of it like a mega sac. The problem with that mega sac is its exterior becomes thickened and the air becomes trapped. And again, what does emphysema mean? Trapped air. If you hear the term emphysema, you and I, we automatically assume that it's respiratory. Oh, grandma got emphysema, fine, we know that. As opposed to emphysema, subcutaneous emphysema is one of the hallmarks of offhand gas gangrene and necrotizing fasciitis, especially flesh-eating bacteria. That's the way you make the diagnosis. Clinically before, and with x-ray before you have to go, looking in there and sampling tissue, because you don't have time to do that nonsense then. You gotta be acting right away. So tumor, mucus, inflammatory material, all of those can do it. Anything that takes away from what's supposed to be there. And it accumulates over time. So even someone like me, a long-term smoker, would have had the potential of losing that space dramatically. And they show you the difference between, look at those large passageways. There you have all this exchange. It's a great back-to-back or side-by-side slide. And here you have these massive areas that are filled with air that's doing you no good. And this is the same magnification. So that's just a really good graphic to demonstrate the severity of it. And so many people have it. It's so tragic. It's the only thing. And so perfusion, blood. Ventilation, gas. We have to match them. And they have auto-regulatory mechanisms. So it's not something we can stop controlling. Okay. The O2, controls perfusion, the blood reaching the alveoli. It changes the artery. So you have two mechanisms helping you. It's directing the blood to the appropriate area where effectively the air is going by changing the arterial or diameters. The CO2 changes the bronchiolar diameters. How's that? So the O2 causes changes when alveolar area, when there's a lot of air in the area, the arterioles dilate. When it's low, they constrict. So it directs the blood to go to alveoli where there's more oxygen so the blood can pick up more oxygen. Thank you. Opposite mechanisms seen in systemic arterioles that dilate when oxygen is low. Okay, so they're trying to bring oxygen to an area that is low. So they reverse themselves. PCO2 in the alveoli cause changes in the diameter of the bronchioles. Where the alveolar CO2 is high, it opens them up. Where it's low, it closes them. And so by opening it up, it allows that excess of CO2 to be rid more rapidly. Between the two of those, it optimizes function, even in the absence of a sufficient amount of surface area, a sufficient amount of viable lung to do that. That is the peril of this system. Not often I get to use the word peril in a sentence. You can tell it's Friday. You're even less engaged. I know. Yeah, but I'm looking forward to the wedding. Stuff like that. We don't have to get clothes. We got clothes for my daughter's wedding. We don't have to go out and buy more new clothes. My wife's got like 4 dresses. She went overboard. One for the rehearsal dinner and one for the wedding. Yeah, she got 2 of those. And she got 2 more. Of course she did. And I'll wear the same suit. Guys can do that. I get to wear my pink shirt. Fashion plate that I am. So all of these synchronize ventilation and perfusion. Okay. Regional variations play a role. Sometimes, you've got a little cold or some allergies are bugging you. Believe me, there'll be changes. Most of us, it doesn't impact us that are there. At the cellular level, okay, internal, or what I would call cellular respiration. So now you're in the other direction, okay? Again, 100 versus 40, so oxygen moves from blood to the tissue. CO2 is higher, again, 45 to 40, okay? And so you can see what happened. The venous blood returning to the heart has increased amount of carbon dioxide. Again, it doesn't have to be a large increment because of the solubility aspect. And it has significantly lowered oxygen, okay? And they're just showing you that same. So it's the reverse, effectively, the reverse of external or pulmonary respiration. Ruh-roh. See, I have you. See. So, how does it make its way around? Oxygen's easy. As you can see, there's not a whole lot of oxygen bubbles, of oxygen gas that's in the bloodstream. It's a very, very tiny amount. Okay, 98.5% loosely is the watchword, because this is where we get into that saturation curve. Okay, bound to each iron of the hemoglobin in red blood cells. So, association, each hemoglobin molecule is 4 polypeptides with the heme. So hemoglobin can transport 4 oxygen molecules. We call it oxyhemoglobin or deoxyhemoglobin. That's fine. Who cares? Okay. Loading and unloading are facilitated by the change in shape. Remember, where did you learn about that? Cell or biochem? That type of stuff, biochem? It's a unique molecule because it can change shape. And that's really the interesting thing. I don't go into the biochemistry of it for 2 reasons. You get it in biochem, and more importantly, I don't understand it as well as she does. So it changes, so it's oxygen, and it's neat. As it binds oxygen, it can bind more oxygen. As it releases oxygen, it releases more oxygen. So it facilitates uptake when necessary, and it facilitates removal or release when necessary. What a country. We have this magic molecule. All good, except everything is all good in your body except when things go wrong. And this is the critical piece. So if it would theoretically fully saturate all 4 heme groups, partially saturated with only one 2 or 3 hemes, not 1, 2, 3 hemes. Yeah, I guess you could say that. Carry oxygen. So the rate of loading and unloading is regulated. Factors that influence it: the amount of oxygen available, temperature, pH, CO2, and that BPG. That's that sort of magical substance that makes it easier to do the unloading part of a thing. It's part of it, which we'll get to. So the heavy influence is the amount of oxygen, as you might guess. It's a little bit different when we say the stimulation for breathing is CO2. Okay, so CO2 plays a significant when we start talking about the actual control of respiration. We're just looking at loading and unloading of hemoglobin. So really, the oxygen is the big player here. The percent of hemoglobin saturation is plotted, resulting in, as you well know, a nonlinear graph referred to as the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve. And it's different for different globins. Myoglobin is different. Fetal hemoglobin is different. Our hemoglobin is this. And all that means is that as it starts to unload, it gets easier to unload. So it's nonlinear. It's not, it's not a linear pattern that you would expect to see here. And so therein lies the problem. So if you begin to look at the numbers, and I have no idea how to blow this up. I'll try. Oh, look what I did. You don't have to thank me. It's part of the surface. Look what happened. So here we have 100 more, not quite 100%, 100% saturation, so right around 80. But as soon as we get, what is this, 90, 92, we start to get, we're over at, what's the name, on the water Sandcastle. We're on one of those water slides at Sandcastle. Or over at Idlewild. And oh, there we go. And that's the problem. It's a slippery slope. And so once we get below 90, it doesn't take much to get farther. That's why that PO2, ability to use the PO2 monitor has become everywhere in medicine. Because it gives us an idea if somebody is close to that slope. And if they're close to that slope, we better be doing something about it. Because if we're not, they're going to fall down the slope. It's done already? Did I miss something? It's terrible. So that's the point I'm trying to make. And effectively, look what happens. Here, normally, when we have unloaded, how many oxygen molecules do we unload? 1. So at typical SAP, at that PO2, when we talk about venous blood, we still have 3 oxygens. That is a reserve that we have that's critical if for transient areas that don't get a sufficient amount of oxygen and still have blood there that they can pull oxygen from. That's the problem. Oh, ruh-roh. So, again, this is the hemoglobin 98% saturated. Further increases, minimal increase in oxygen by venous blood, venous reserve. And they're just looking at the difference with regard to these. And are there subtle changes in the dissociation curve, whether you're at elevation or not? They talk about that. I don't get a lot out of it. It's not a big deal. So the other factors that are there, increases in temperature, acidity, PCO2, and this BPG molecule modifier results, and all of these, if we have increased temperature, if the blood becomes more on the acidic side, it tends more toward acidosis. If there's an increase in CO2, and now we get into that same equation, famously the carbonic acid buffer and an accumulation of excess BPG, all of those things, and it occurs in the capillaries, and they decrease the hemoglobin's ability to bind. So these are the factors that increase the unloading. Okay, a shift of O2 hemoglobin dissociation curve to the right. So if you went back and looked at these things under their circumstances, it would shift it. And when they start saying, if you're shifting it to the right So it's going to unload faster would be the way to describe it. So if by the same token, if we go in a direction of alkalinity, we improve the PCO2, if we limit the BPG, if we lower the temperature, it'll go into the leftward. And so and it's a very good here, normal. And look at the difference when it's warmer. And look how rapidly that's going to go off. I mean, you're not just having a typical slippery slope. I mean, you're really going down. And here it's being held on to. So a warmer temperature, it loads faster, and a cooler temperature, significantly cooler temperature, it holds on to. And the same for these other factors that you can see when we're looking at pH. So again, and we're more likely to be acidotic than alkalotic. There's a problem. Think of a diabetic. Okay, they're more likely to have problems with acidosis than alkalosis. And the diabetics have multiple problems. It's going to manifest themselves in their breathing. BPG is produced by red blood cells during glycolysis. They rise when oxygen levels are low. Okay? So as the cells utilize glucose, they use oxygen, causing increases in PCO2, increasing in acidosis, all of those things. And we refer to this as an important name to remember, the Bohr, capital BOHR effect. Oxygen unloading occurs where it's needed the most. That's the idea of that effect. So whether it's producing BPG or it's causing these things to occur subsequently to it, effectively, this is another one of those neat safeguards in tissue that is not well perfused. Rather than just, let's say, giving up one oxygen or having difficulty giving up one oxygen, it more easily gives up that oxygen to those areas that are poorly perfused. So heat production in active tissue can also play a role with it. Increased oxygen unloading to the active tissues. It's a good thing. Again, up to a certain point. I say it again and again because it's true. This is the other important part. CO2 has 3 different means to be transported. Yes, it can dissolve. So is there a certain amount of, there's a greater amount of carbon dioxide? Yes, in PCO2. About 20% is bound to the globin, not the heme. That was the mistake years ago, is the oxygen jumps off and the carbon dioxide comes on. It doesn't work that way. The vast majority, okay, 70% dissolves in the plasma and forms that remarkable, it's the beauty of double duty. We take our 2 waste products and we make the single most important buffering system in the body. You're on point with that one. Little help. So it did well for Robin. My best friend's wife underwent another modification of a hip replacement, and she's doing really well. And she was really at the very end after multiple surgeries. So just found that out last night. It was a very good conversation. She was in trouble. So formation of bicarbonate, which we know involves CO2 with water, carbonic acid. We have an abundance in the bloodstream of carbonic anhydrase. That's the important enzyme. It's reversible. The difference here, it's a weak acid. Weak acids make great buffers because, if anything, they're reluctant to give up their hydrogen ion. It doesn't matter. That's what makes them a buffer. We can give it up. We can keep it. You want one, take it. If you don't want it, I'll take yours. It probably worked in the Diamond District in New York. All Jewish. Yeah, I'll take that. No, you take that. Murray, you can have this. No, Maury, you can take this. Jewish humor. I was raised by a Jewish lady, my mother. So carbonic anhydrase, very useful. Systemic capillary, the bicarbonate is created, it quickly diffuses from red blood cells into the plasma. This is interesting. This is the chloride shift. So the bicarbonate from the red blood cells is balanced as chloride moves into the red blood cells. Chloride shift, when we get to digestive, is a player, very important in creating hydrochloric acid in the gut. So understand chloride shift, we have the ability to, those really important anions, bicarbonate and chloride are big players. We already looked at chloride gated channels in the nervous system and the role they play. This is important too. I like your hair that way, by the way. It's okay. Does it naturally curl?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My first wife was like that. I mean, it was just, she couldn't help it. It just curled right up. My son and his son, my son in the Navy and his son are like this. Same thing. That's why, I think that's why he stayed in the military, because he has that flat top. Super curly here. So here, you can see, and this just really, I mean, you can look through this as well as I can explain it to you. But really, this is the chloride shift in action. Bicarbonate moving out, because we're doing this effectively on the right red blood cell, where the carbonic anhydrase and the carbonic acid is being formed. And in order to balance out, by putting the bicarbonate out, to balance out acidity, okay, we bring in chloride. Okay, the process occurs in reverse in the lung. The bicarbonate moves into the red blood cells. While the chloride moves out, the bicarbonate binds with the protons to form carbonic acid, and it's split back by the carbonic hydrase, and the CO2 can then diffuse into the alveoli. So that's the beauty of that particular system here. The chloride really plays a very interesting role, because we look for irregularities in chloride concentration in mucus in the lung and in the digestive tract. That's the hallmark of cystic fibrosis, the genetically based disease, cystic fibrosis. My middle one, not the one I was just talking about, was worked up because he had digestive and respiratory problems. Again, he was adopted. We had no real reliable history genetically about, dribs and drabs. I mean, he's reconnected with some relatives, with the ancestry things, but not, we didn't get a whole lot of useful information. And so that's what they're talking about with this. And here's the Haldane effect. So we had the Bohr effect. The Haldane effect is a little bit different. It's the amount of CO2 transported is affected by PO2. The lower the PO2 and the hemoglobin oxygen saturation, the more carbon dioxide can be carried by the blood. Okay, the reduced hemoglobin buffers hydrogen ion and forms carbamyl hemoglobin more easily. So bottom line is, where the Bohr effect will unload the oxygen, the Haldane effect will facilitate the carbon dioxide movement. So as the more carbon dioxide enters the blood, more oxygen disassociates. So as the hemoglobin, the oxygenated hemoglobin releases the oxygen, it more readily forms with CO2. So together they work together. Haldane effectively moving and binding or rather facilitating the transportation of the carbon dioxide, and the unloading, the Bohr effect, unloading the oxygen. At least one of those is an important name for the test. I would remember those depending where you're going forward. Proper names some people like, rather than just understanding the process. So here's that carbonic acid buffering system. Very straightforward. So it's considered the bicarbonate, we call it the alkaline reserve of this particular system. And then this is how we affect it with breathing. Slow, shallow breathing, an increase in CO2 in the blood, drop in pH, rapid, deep breathing, a decrease in CO2 in the blood, rise in pH, whatever. So we just sort of follow the bouncing wall. If we blow off CO2, okay, going to rid ourselves of a certain amount. We're going to be able to blow that off and rid ourselves of a certain amount of acidity. If we can't do that, we retain it. That's there. So we can help adjust pH when disturbances are caused by metabolic factor. So breathing is that. I mean, it's like going to the gym and adjusting your breathing when you're doing an aerobic activity. You're on the bike, you're on wherever. Like I'm on the treadmill. So all of those things. And then this textbook, and let's stop it here. There's a lot to talk about with different causes of hypoxia. So I'll stop it and we'll pick it up Monday. So we'll conclude a little early. My wife needs me to get home and do some stuff there. So you shall benefit by having less of me. Thank you.